Right, so I'm going to try and articulate my first finding. This is where doing these films gets particularly tricky, because after all of the data analysis process I described in the previous films, I would say but I did it a couple of years ago and it's getting increasingly difficult for me to understand my own thesis. But I had a really rich understanding of intention, and my aim for this film is to give you a really brief overview. So there is definitely more information in the thesis, and the thesis is freely available to read, and actually these chapters of the thesis are probably the interesting bit. This is where I talk about what I find. So I was trying to do research with people with profound intellectual and multiple disabilities, and I wanted to do that research together. So not me doing research on them and or about them, but with them. And in order to do that, I needed to find a space of shared meaning where the type of meaning that we were apprehending together was meaning accessible to both of us, to all of us. And so that can't be meaning based in language or meaning based in abstract things. And so I was using Merleau-Ponty's philosophy, and the films that are about the page numbers around the 40s, they give a greater insight into the philosophical foundations for this work. But I was using Merleau-Ponty's idea of intention as a practical tool in this work. So he describes, as I mentioned in those films, that so he's thinking of people not as brains in bodies, but as movements of consciousness through time. And he's trying to describe that experience of being a flow of consciousness through time. So he says things like, if you want a drink, you place your intention in the drink, and then you experience yourself as a movement towards the world, a movement towards the drink. And it's that directional flow of consciousness. So my intention is in the drink. And I was using that idea to find a shared phenomenological space that made research encounters possible with people with profound intellectual and multiple disabilities. So basically I was going into the field and asking, where does your intention lie? And it's such an interesting question to ask in relation to people who often have very profound physical disabilities, because whilst your average able-bodied, intellectually capable child will show and say, and in many ways where their intention lies. I've got a little 5-year-old, he will run towards the balloon. It's very clear that he is moving towards the world, towards the balloon. That's where his intention lies. But there was a little girl that I worked with who is about the same age as my child, and she had very limited physical movement. So she might see the balloon and her intention might go to it, but there's nothing physically about her that tells you that that's where her intention is. And that thinking of people as movements through consciousness through time was like a kind of brain gym, because I have been conditioned, because I'm part of Western society, to think in accordance with Descartes' cogito. So I think of myself as a brain in a body. We are taught we are minds in bodies. And when you look at people, my intention was in the drink, when you look at people as if they are brains in bodies, and then especially when you sit alongside people with complex disabilities, all you really see is the body. You can't see somebody's brain, you can't see somebody's thoughts. You look for representations of those thoughts, and people who are able-bodied and who have access to language have lots of ways of representing those thoughts. But when you sit alongside somebody with complex disabilities, you might get micro signals. You were looking for things. They do this if they like that. They do this if they don't like that. But it's really mostly what you're seeing is a disabled body. And when you shift in your head to thinking not as the person as a brain in a body, but the person as a movement of consciousness through time, then you perceive them in very different ways. But I found holding on to that conception of what it is to be a person that is different to my day-to-day way of thinking that I've been conditioned into thinking really difficult. It was like walking through chewing gum. I would repeatedly snap back and realise as I was writing my field notes or as I was reflecting on things that I'd gone back to that body-brain duality. So it almost took practice to think about people as movement of consciousness through time. And as I was trying to work out where people's intention lay, I was quite often, because I've worked in special schools, I've worked in adult care settings, I've been a foster carer, I deliver training about working with people with complex disabilities, and I'm often talking about and often doing in my own practice, looking for those small signals. You know, somebody's face might tense up a bit if they don't like the noise in the room, somebody's hand might twitch if they want the toy. You're looking for these little micro signals. And what I realised, and this is the joy of having had so much time in the field, was that my best way to find where their intention lay was through feeling, not through observation. Observation was a very brain and body way of thinking, but feeling for the movement of their intention, that was much more effective. But that required my own embodiment and my own presentness, and then that is complicated by all manner of things. I'm going to stop this video here, and I will tell you more about the intention finding in the next video.